Number 7. In the first 6 months of 2025, 5 men lost their lives behind the walls of Mississippi's prisons. 5 homicides, each one a silent echo of violence that has become all too familiar. These killings are not isolated incidents. They are symptoms of a deeper crisis, one rooted in chronic understaffing, unchecked gang power, and a system stretched beyond its limits. Mississippi's prisons have long carried a reputation for danger. But what makes this crisis even more alarming is that so many of these homicides go unsolved. Investigators often arrive too late, overwhelmed by a lack of resources, and with too few officers on the ground to control the chaos. Violence thrives in the shadows. The numbers tell part of the story. Chronic understaffing leaves vast cell blocks supervised by a handful of officers, sometimes just one. Guards are forced to choose between keeping order or protecting themselves. In that vacuum of authority, gangs step in, imposing their own rules, running contraband networks, and controlling who lives and who dies. Inside these walls, gangs have become more than groups of men. They are governing bodies, filling the power void left by the state. Violence is currency. Respect is bought with blood. And when disputes arise, they are settled not through mediation, but through murder. For families on the outside, the news often comes with little explanation. A son, a brother, a father, gone with no answers, no suspects, no justice. Homicide cases vanish into bureaucratic silence, buried beneath paperwork, excuses, and political promises that rarely materialize into reform. Investigators say the lack of staffing means basic procedures. Searches, patrols, even securing weapons often fail. Makeshift knives, smuggled cell phones, and narcotics flow unchecked, fueling deadly confrontations. By the time officers respond, the scene is already soaked in violence. Mississippi is not alone in this struggle, but its prison crisis stands out. Repeated federal warnings, lawsuits, and inmate testimonies have painted a picture of a system in collapse. Yet year after year, reforms stall, budgets tighten, and the cycle of violence continues. 5 lives ended in just half a year. 5 stories silenced before they could be told. Behind bars, justice is supposed to be served. But in Mississippi's prisons, justice is often denied, not only to the victims, but to the truth itself, until the state confronts the roots of its prison crisis: understaffing, gang control, and systemic neglect. The killings will not stop. They will simply fade into statistics, waiting for the next headline to remind us of the human cost. Number 6. In March 2025, violence erupted inside a Nevada prison. 3 inmates were killed in a single attack, an assault that investigators linked to a faction tied to the Mexican mafia. It was swift, brutal, and calculated. Another reminder of the deadly grip prison gangs hold over life behind bars. The assault unfolded in minutes. Rival gang members were cornered, and the attackers left little chance of survival. By the time correctional officers responded, the violence had already claimed 3 lives. Blood on the concrete marked yet another chapter in the long history of prison gang warfare. The Mexican mafia, known as La M, is one of the most feared prison organizations in America. Though born in California in the 1950s, its influence now stretches far beyond state lines. In Nevada, its shadow is long. Affiliates and allied groups operate within the prison system, enforcing loyalty, controlling the drug trade, and punishing those who defy their rule. The victims in March were not random. Sources inside say they were targeted because of rival ties, gang allegiances that collided violently in the overcrowded, understaffed prison environment. Inmates' whisper of warnings ignored, of tension that had been building for weeks. When the violence came, it came with precision. For families on the outside, news of the killings was devastating. Loved ones who were serving time never made it home, their sentences effectively ending in execution by fellow inmates. The state could only confirm the dead and promise an investigation critics say may never bring accountability. Authorities in Nevada face the same challenges that plague prisons nationwide: overcrowding, contraband, and organized gangs with more manpower than the officers guarding them. Behind these walls, gangs act as governments unto themselves, deciding who has protection, who pays tax, and who dies. The killings in March were not the first, and they will not be the last. The Mexican Mafia's affiliates are locked in a constant struggle for dominance. Their rivals, be they other Hispanic gangs, white prison groups, or independents, know that a single wrong move can mean a death sentence carried out in the most violent fashion. 3 men murdered in the Nevada desert, not by the state, but by the invisible hand of prison power. Their deaths raise difficult questions. How much control do prison officials really have? And in a system where gangs write the rules, is true justice even possible behind the walls? Number 5, 2 prison yards, 2 summers, 2 eruptions of violence that sent shockwaves across the prison system in the American West. In July 2024, one of California's most notorious gang leaders, Ezekiel Romo of the Blythe Street Gang, was murdered inside Centinela State Prison. Just 1 month later in Nevada, another blood-soaked clash left 3 inmates dead, including a leader of a white supremacist gang. Together, these incidents reveal a dangerous truth. Prisons are not merely places of confinement, but battlegrounds where power, betrayal, and revenge rule. Ezekiel Romo had long been a feared figure on the streets of Los Angeles. As a leader of the Blythe Street Gang, his name was tied to extortion, drugs, and murder. Even behind bars, Romo's reach extended into the outside world, ordering hits, dictating moves, and maintaining his grip on a fractured organization. But inside Centinela, power has a price. In July 2024, that price was his life. Other inmates turned on him, delivering the kind of justice prison gangs know best: swift and final. For years, Romo had ordered killings within his own ranks, eliminating rivals and silencing dissent. But in prison, loyalty is fragile, and enemies are everywhere. When he fell, many saw it as the inevitable end for a man who lived by violence and died by it. Only weeks later, in August 2024, Nevada faced its own bloodshed. A fight broke out between rival groups, escalating into a riot that left 3 inmates dead. Among the slain was a white supremacist gang leader, an inmate whose identity carried both status and danger in the world of prison politics. The Nevada killings underscored the deadly balance of power behind bars. Gangs are not merely street-level organizations transplanted into prison. They are institutions in their own right. They form alliances, declare wars, and enforce their rules through blood. When leadership is challenged, the results are often written in violence. Officials in both California and Nevada promised investigations, but the reality is grim. Staff shortages, overcrowding, and unchecked gang influence make these facilities tinder boxes waiting for a spark. Once violence erupts, it spreads quickly, leaving officers outnumbered and inmates at the mercy of the strongest groups. The deaths of Ezekiel Romo in California and a white supremacist leader in Nevada highlight the brutal cycle of prison life. Leaders rise and fall, their legacies measured not in years lived, but in lives taken. Behind these walls, justice is often carried out not by the state, but by the inmates themselves. And for every killing, the message is clear. In prison, power is never permanent. Number 4. In January 2025, federal authorities unveiled a chilling discovery. From deep inside California's prison system, leaders of the Aryan Brotherhood, a notorious white supremacist gang, had ordered a wave of murders in Los Angeles County. At least 5 killings were tied directly to their command. The orders didn't come from a street corner or a gang hideout, but from prison cells, where smuggled cell phones gave convicted murderers the power to reach beyond the walls. The Aryan Brotherhood is one of America's most feared prison gangs. Born in the 1960s at San Quentin, its reputation was built on blood, extortion, drug trafficking, and ruthless violence. Membership is for life, bound by oaths of secrecy and loyalty. And even decades later, from solitary confinement, its leaders continue to wield deadly influence. Federal investigators say that Aryan Brotherhood shot callers used contraband phones to communicate with members and associates outside. The instructions were clear: identify targets, coordinate movements, and execute. The victims were chosen carefully: rivals, defectors, and anyone who threatened the Brotherhood's grip on power. In Los Angeles County, the bloodshed bore their signature. Authorities linked the killings to a wider network of violence, proof that prison gangs are not confined by razor wire. Their power spills into communities, turning city streets into extensions of the prison yard. In this case, the orders crossed miles of desert and concrete, yet carried the same weight as if spoken face to face. For decades, the state has tried to dismantle the Aryan Brotherhood through prosecutions and long-term isolation of its leaders. But each crackdown seems to reveal just how adaptive the gang has become. Smuggled cell phones, encrypted messages, and coded communication keep the chain of command alive. Even locked down 23 hours a day, leaders can orchestrate murders as easily as if they were walking free. Cell phones have become the new weapon of choice, cheaper and easier to smuggle than drugs or knives. With them, prison gangs manage drug sales, extortion rackets, and contract killings. For law enforcement, the challenge is immense. How do you silence voices that refuse to be contained? 5 murders ordered from behind bars. The Aryan Brotherhood has once again proven that their reach extends far beyond prison walls. For federal authorities, it's a reminder of an old truth. When it comes to prison gangs, locking a man away does not always strip him of power. Sometimes it only sharpens his control. And in Los Angeles County, the cost was measured in blood. Number 3. In July 2025, justice was handed down in a courtroom in New York. A leader of the notorious MS-13 gang received a sentence of 68 years in prison, a punishment for a reign of terror that spanned murders, attempted murders, and conspiracies carried out both on the streets and from behind bars. The crimes were brutal, calculated, and relentless, and they left a trail of bodies across New York and beyond. 8 murders, multiple attempted killings, each one tied to a leader whose power reached beyond his cell. Prosecutors painted a chilling picture of a man who wielded influence over a violent network, directing hits and orchestrating attacks with the same cold efficiency, whether free or incarcerated. His sentencing marked one of the harshest penalties imposed on an MS-13 figure in the state's history. MS-13, or Mara Salvatrucha, was born in Los Angeles in the 1980s, forged by Salvadoran immigrants who had fled civil war. Over the decades, it expanded across the United States, particularly in New York, Maryland, and Virginia. Known for its extreme violence and loyalty, Enforced through blood, MS-13 has become a symbol of transnational gang power, a shadow army operating in both neighborhoods and prisons. Even in custody, this leader's command never weakened. Through coded messages, smuggled phones, and loyal foot soldiers, he maintained authority over gang operations. The killings he ordered were not random. They were targeted acts meant to punish rivals, enforce discipline, and strike fear into communities. Prosecutors described him as a man who believed prison walls could not contain his power. Authorities in New York have waged a long and difficult war against MS-13. Task forces, federal indictments, and joint operations have chipped away at the gang's leadership. But the sentencing in July 2025 was seen as a landmark, a signal that even the most entrenched leaders can be held accountable. Still, for communities scarred by the violence, the memories remain fresh and the fear persists. 8 lives were taken, families shattered, communities left to mourn. The sentencing may have closed one chapter, but it cannot erase the pain of those who lost loved ones to MS-13's brutality. For them, justice is measured not only in years, but in the silence of voices that can never return. 68 years, a lifetime behind bars for a man who thought he could command death from a cell. The message is clear. No matter how powerful, no matter how feared, leaders of gangs like MS-13 are not untouchable. But as long as the gang's network endures, the struggle between law enforcement and the world's most violent prison gangs is far from over. Number 2. In September 2025, a deadly mistake came to light in Illinois. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement rearrested Aldo Salazar Bahena, a convicted killer and member of the violent La Razo gang. Bahena had been serving time for a 2005 murder, yet he walked free from Stateville Correctional Center, released despite a standing ICE detainer meant to keep him in custody. The case exposed cracks in a system where law, politics, and public safety collide. Aldo Salazar Bahena was no ordinary inmate. His conviction stemmed from a brutal killing nearly 2 decades earlier, a crime that tied him to the feared La Razo gang. Known for violent turf wars and cross-border criminal networks, the gang has left its mark in communities across the Midwest. For Bahena, prison was supposed to be the end of the road. But somehow it wasn't. Despite ICE placing a detainer, an official request to transfer Bahena into federal custody upon release, Stateville officials let him go. For days, a convicted murderer with a history of gang ties was back on the streets of Illinois. The release was not just a bureaucratic slip. It was a reminder of the deep tensions between state prisons, federal immigration enforcement, and the limits of communication in a fractured system. Federal agents acted quickly. ICE tracked Bahena down and took him back into custody, ensuring he would not disappear into the underworld of gang networks. But the damage was done. For critics, the incident symbolized a dangerous breakdown, proof that even high-risk offenders can fall through the cracks when systems fail to align. The La Razo gang, though less publicized than larger groups like MS-13 or the Mexican Mafia, has carved its place in violent crime. Its members are known for extortion, drug trafficking, and contract killings. For law enforcement, Bahena's release was not just about one man. It was about the broader risk of organized gangs regaining one of their own, even temporarily, through lapses in oversight. The case sparked questions with no easy answers. Should states be required to honor all federal detainers? How many violent offenders are slipping through gaps in communication? And what happens when a gang member convicted of murder is given even a brief return to freedom? Aldo Salazar Bahena is back in custody, but his release from Stateville Correctional Center is now a cautionary tale of fractured systems, deadly consequences, and the enduring reach of prison gangs. In Illinois, it was a mistake measured in fear. Elsewhere, the question lingers. Will the next one be measured in blood? Number 1. In September 2025, Los Angeles was once again shaken by violence, this time outside a place designed for second chances. A state prisoner, nearing the end of his sentence and serving time at a community reentry facility near MacArthur Park, was gunned down in the street. Authorities say the killing was no accident. It was a targeted strike, orchestrated by rival gang members who had been waiting for their chance. The reentry program was supposed to mark the final step before freedom, a halfway point between prison walls and society. For many inmates, it offers a chance to rebuild, to learn, and to start over. But for one man, the transition became a death sentence. As he walked outside the facility, gunfire erupted. By the time paramedics arrived, he was gone. Law enforcement quickly pointed to gangs. The victim, still under state custody, carried a history of affiliation. Detectives believe rivals tracked him, marking his every move until the moment they struck. The shooting revealed a brutal truth. Even outside prison, the politics of gangs follow. Escape is rarely permanent, and freedom is never guaranteed. For decades, Los Angeles has been ground zero for gang rivalries that span from street corners to prison yards. Inside correctional facilities, alliances and vendettas are forged in blood. On the outside, those same conflicts play out in neighborhoods like MacArthur Park. The killing in September was not random. It was the continuation of a war that never stops, only shifts locations. Community reentry programs were designed to break the cycle, to give inmates the tools to avoid slipping back into crime. But these facilities often sit in the very neighborhoods where gangs maintain power. For participants, walking outside the gates can mean walking back into a battlefield they thought they had left behind. Officials warned that the shooting may have been retaliation, one act in a long chain of violence between rival sets. For police and corrections staff, the challenge is immense. How do you protect inmates who are technically free, but still carry the weight of old allegiances and enemies? In the end, one man's path to redemption ended in gunfire. His killing outside a reentry program raises haunting questions. Can rehabilitation survive in the shadow of gang warfare? Can a man ever truly leave his past behind when rivals are determined to pull him back? For Los Angeles, the answer remains written in blood, and for the reentry system, the struggle continues.